a little contentious, perhaps, to some people. Because I think we've come to a point in this movement about games for impact, games for learning, where we've made a lot of progress. There's lots of different things going on. And therefore, probably it's good for all of us to kind of come clean about what we actually meant when we said we should be doing this. Now, to give you an example, I have made the claim that good games are good for learning. But it seems like a lot of people thought I made the claim bad games are good for learning. So that's what they seem to test. Now, in reality, I actually didn't want to make the claim good games are good for learning. I wanted to make a slightly different claim, and it's the one I want to push at you today, because I want to push that this is one way forward in the field. It's not the only way forward. And that is the claim that it's not that good games are good for learning. It is that what I will call big G games, I'll tell you what that is in a minute, that good big G games are good for learning. So that if we want to do games for impact, what I want to argue is we should be making not little g games, but big G games. Now, what is the difference between a little g game and a big G game? Well, the difference is this. By a little g game, I just mean the software, the thing you bought, the thing you put on the screen. By a big G game, I mean that thing that you put on the screen, the little g game, plus the social interactions that go on around the game. That is how the game interrelates with stuff outside the game, whether it's interest-driven communities on the internet or activities people are doing, right? The big G game is both, and what I want to argue is we should be testing and making big G games. Now, whenever you make a claim like this, you have to specify what you mean by the word good. Right? Now, in my original book, I've set out 36 principles that, for me, define a game as good for learning. Right? And again, it's not worth testing games that only meet two of them. Now, what I need to do is to specify what makes a big G game good. So, a big G game, to me, is an affinity space plus, I don't know, about 20 principles that I'm going to run through very fast. So I'm going to say that if you have a good piece of software, you have made a good affinity space, and you meet these 20 principles, then you have made a good big G game, and that this is what you ought to be making, from my point of view. Now, an affinity space is just an interest-driven space, usually on the internet, where people come together because they have an affinity, a passion for the problems you have motivated them to solve in the game. That is, so people they play The Sims, and they have a passion for The Sims, and they go off out of the game into a space with other people on the internet, and they do challenges, and they write novels, and they do stuff, right? It's where the game has legs into the world. So, and I have written a couple of books on affinity spaces, and what they're like and what makes them good. But right now, I want to concentrate not on the affinity space, but on the X. That is, what principles does a good big G game have? What do we expect it to do well beyond just having an affinity space? That is, we certainly expect it to have legs out into the social world, but what do we expect? Now, obviously, I'm now going to go through a lot of things with words in them that sadly have meanings other people gave them. And I want to be very clear what I mean by them. And I don't have the time to elaborate this fully, but I just want to give you the flavor for it anyway. So I'm going to say that a big G game has to, for example, have these features. It has to be a form of what I call collective intelligence. And by collective intelligence, I mean that the system you create for learning with multiple people, multiple tools, is smarter than anybody in it. It actually can think and solve problems beyond what the individuals can do. I also demand that in collective intelligence, the system is good at directing you to where you can make your best contribution. Right? It manages your attention. In addition, there should be good gamification in games. Most gamification isn't very good, but there should be gamification. By gamification, I mean, how do you create motivation and direct attention? That is, how do you direct people where they can make their best effort, and how do you motivate them to do so? That's what I mean by gamification. And therefore, gamification is a part of any game you make, right? Because if you haven't got any motivation or you haven't directed attention correctly, you've got a bad game of any sort. I also demand that in the Big G game it has smart tools. That is, there are agents and tools in it that actually make you smarter, right? Think of SWAT 4, where the artificially intelligent agents you're directing know more than you do and model for you the behaviors you should do, right? And then I think that the Big G games should be a form of crowdsourcing. What crowdsourcing means is that you recruit as many contributions as you can, that you set up a thing in which nearly everybody who enters, whether they're newbies or experts, can make a contribution, right? So that you pool all contributions. And then finally, Big G games should certainly have what Henry Jenkins calls convergence, and that is that they should use multiple media, right? Social media. And so we should not have an obsession that it has to be on a PlayStation, or it has to be augmented reality, we should have everything. We should converge, right? Now, examples of those principles, brilliantly done in World of Warcraft, because think of this, here's World of Warcraft with the screen full with a bunch of mods. You know that these are mods the players have built that are essentially little tools that explicate for you what's going on in the statistical underpinnings of the game. For example, one of those tools up there is a damage meter, right? It shows you for each character in what role they're playing, whether they are doing the optimal amount of damage or they're having the optimal performance they can have, right? And all the other stuff is giving you copious information so that you can strategize with each other, you can make new plans, and you can understand the statistical underpinnings of the game, right? This is all made by the players, and what it essentially is doing is rendering playing World of Warcraft a theoretical enterprise, right? Because it's actually explicating communal theories. People fight over what's the right damage meter. So you can see very clearly in a thing like this, I am one hell of a lot smarter because there's a bunch of smart tools up there that have made me perform at a high level. Furthermore, they can, as whatever my level is, I can utilize the information that is necessary for me to go to the next step to get better. So this is a good example of, now by the way, all those mods are really not just part of the software. They're really part of a community of theory crafters, right? They're part of the affinity space who's put their products into this stuff. All right, so in addition, good Big G games will data mine. That is, they will collect copious data and they will represent it back to the players so that they can get better at solving problems, better at thinking. Now, one of the big mistakes people make here is they think you can data mine off just the clicks in the software stream. But remember, there's a bunch of social interactions going on, and that has to be data mined too. Thinking that you data mined your algebra game because you got all the click streams, but didn't data mine the collective intelligence, the affinity space of people taking algebra into a passion, is being too much of a tech system. Got to mine all the data. Assessment. Games should build in assessment, not as a score, but as a trajectory towards growth. I should know how am I growing across time in comparison to a billion other players, and not only that, in comparison to how many trajectories to mastery there are. Is mine innovative? Where does it stand? The assessment should be entirely about growth. And growth not only as an individual, but growth in a community of people who know where they stand. And that's why there should be no standards set up by either God or administrators. Standards should be indigenous to the people doing it, who model the highest performance, settle on what it is to get it, and meet it. That is, standards are internal, indigenous to people with a passion for something. And if you look at affinity spaces out there in the world, people are setting very high standards. So if you as an administrator want to vet this, fine. You go out and show that these Big G games, these social interactions and software together, are setting very high standards, like in those damage meters and stuff, where there's statistical underpinnings. And once you know that they're setting high standards, get out of the way. Because the standards arise bottom up from the community. They don't come top down from God. All right. So games can do this very well. Any real-time strategy game, at the end of it, gives you dozens of slides that shows you on dozens or hundreds of variables where you stood in relationship to all the other players. Of course, there's already in the gaming sphere with Halo or other games where people can turn over their computers and get wonderful representations and heat maps and everything else, right? So games are already beginning to do this. But again, the data, if you're talking about people going for a long period of time through a game and social interactions, then you're also talking about getting to represent their growth as a community, their growth socially, their growth in collaboration. So that's where the data mining comes from. All right, games should, for whatever impact you want, big G games should be about intelligence. But unfortunately, we have a very, very limited view in our research on intelligence that is just beginning to change. Games should not be about just cognitive intelligence. And they certainly, this is a contentious point, they should not be about filling your head up with useless information to put on tasks. Right? They should be about distributed intelligence. Distributed intelligence is, can you leverage the intelligence that's not only in your head, but in other people's head and in the tools, the smart tools you've been given? Can you network your head with other people and other tools? It should certainly be about emotional intelligence. We have a world, Alan Greenspan could be its model, of intelligence going awry when it's never connected to things like civic responsibility, emotional intelligence, and social intelligence, right? We know where that goes. Now, it should also be about social intelligence, because again, since these are distributed systems in which you have to have collective intelligence, if you cannot socially get along with other people, then you'll be in a home with padded stuff. And it should be about embodied intelligence. We're going to see this, that there should certainly be intelligence that is in practice embodied, so that it's about problem solving. You understand the physics at an embodied level. You see how it works. You don't understand it just in words. And that's the one really good thing the software is good at. It can put you in a world like Portal and show you what it feels like to fly across the room and obey the law of conservation momentum, right? So we want, and that, by the way, is almost always missing in school, because schools do not value tacit understanding. They value only explicit understanding. And finally, this is the principle that's most important to me in all of the principles I've done, what I call situated understanding, which simply means words and representation should be married to images, to actions, to goals, to emotions, to dialogue, not just to other words and text. See, school is, if you don't understand a text, we give you another one. But situated understanding is, if you don't understand these words, they take you out in the world and show you something. Right? So, now, a good example of how the Sims. People go into the Sims, and they get into their affinity space, and they do a challenge. There's a challenge where a lady, I've written about this in one of my books with Elizabeth Hayes, where a German woman challenges a group of British and American players to use the Sims to simulate the life of a poor single parent. And you can only win the challenge if you get your kids safely out of the house as adults. You get a bonus if they can go to college. And it turns out, of course, this is very hard to do in The Sims because poverty isn't fun and this is an entertainment game. So she kind of writes a 90-page rule book that shows what you can and cannot do in the challenge. And then if you win the challenge, you have to use the feature in The Sims where you can put pictures of your Sims with words and write the equivalent of a graphic novel about the story of your family and how it reflected on the Sims as a simulation. This is, see, emotional intelligence, social intelligence, cognitive intelligence. You won't see an assignment this good in social studies in schools today, right? And you know that the emotional and social intelligence work because she gets women who write to her, I am a poor single parent, and this captured my experience so well, I'm going to keep it and show it to my kid when he gets older so he knows what it was like to struggle with it. And that's a win. All right, so now games should be, the big G game must induce critical thinking. By critical thinking, I mean thinking strategically at a meta level. The World of Warcraft slide already showed you that, right? Once I got all those smart mods, and I've got all these people networked together in teams, I think the enterprises become theoretical. I'm thinking all the time at a meta level about my strategies, and I have a whole bunch of tools that ironically let me do it as I'm playing. Right? I'm actually looking at my tools, playing at the same time, applying meta knowledge to the game at the very moment I'm playing. Very powerful. Right? People don't think of game playing as theoretical, but when it gets to this level, it is theoretical. The Big G games should induce design thinking, right? I don't think you can play any game unless you think like a designer, as Will Wright has pointed out. You have to model in your head, what is this rule system? How is it interacting? How can I leverage that interaction for my goals and my desires, right? So that's design thinking. And actually, if your kid is playing a game but not playing it as a designer, by the way, if you're reading a book and not reading it as a writer, then you're not doing design thinking and you're not getting the full value out of that thing. The Big G game should ensure that that happens. System thinking, of course. In the world today, we're being screwed royally by interacting complex systems and their unintended consequences. So there's probably no more important tool than teaching people what it means to have complexly interacting variables and unintended consequences. And when you build a nice Big G game, you always have multiple variables interacting. And people can, even in that challenge about poverty, you find out, wow, there's a lot of interacting variables here. Right? This is one we're going to have to teach some researchers on games about. Now, model-based reasoning, which is exactly just the same thing as how I define critical thinking, but this is what scientists call it. The scientists call design thinking model-based reasoning. It's the core of science. So, and any Big G game with model-based design thinking, critical thinking is already an enactment of the core thinking of science. You couldn't avoid it. So you don't need, by the way, to put STEM on its cover. We won't save ourselves from the Chinese by investing in more STEM. And then finally, games should encourage not just this type of thinking, but innovation and creativity. That is, you really cannot say you have benefited from experience. All you can do from that experience is replicate what everybody else does. So that Big G game must be able to allow everybody to be pushed to innovation and creativity. Now, the new SimCity, which of course I haven't played because it is out, is, from what I've seen, I hope it isn't feature creep, from what I've seen is that new SimCity, in anything you do, it will actually display the model and its variables right on the screen as you do it. So you can actually see the interactions of the variables and how what you're doing is tweaking them. See, I mean, that's pretty, if that stays, that's pretty powerful, because I can then manipulate my city as a visual element, and I can manipulate its underlying models and see how the model changes the city changes the model. This is situated understanding. It's everything we would hope in terms of model-based reasoning, but it is also, of course, an open-ended playground which allows for creativity and innovation because you're building your own city, right? You get to live with it, dying or not. All right. Now, every Big G game should be about literacy. Remember, we said that one of the things it must do is give you tacit understandings, embodiment. If you don't understand physics, you better understand it in your gut, in your body. You better see it as you do it. The way I can see after playing Portal, I can see myself go right across the room. Anybody who played Portal, if I asked you, how could Jim go across the top of the room? Every one of you knows what we did. Right? Put a portal here, put a portal there, get the momentum going, out Jim comes, right? I know what it feels like to be a part of it. But on the other hand, it is important that some, not all, some of your tacit knowledge can be articulated, because articulation is important for power, right? And what you see in so many good Big G games, not all, but in a lot of them, the game as software does the tacit understanding. And our affinity spaces, people began theory crafting, let's say, well, look, it does the articulation understanding. Or a thing like in Portal, you get the physical understanding, then you go to a wiki that the community has built, and it explicates all the physics. Then you go back and mod it, and you see other things. So it's the combination of the two. Problem solving. Big G games and little G games are not about competing with the testing industry for trivial pursuit. They are about problem solving. A game is not a game if it's not about problem solving, right? And that does not mean that facts are unimportant. What it means is that in a good Big G game, any fact you're teaching is taught as a tool for problem solving. The person doesn't just know the fact, they know what you do with it. Right? And why is this? Lots of work in education has shown repeatedly that if you keep teaching for facts, you don't get problem solving. But if you teach for problem solving and make people use the facts over and over again to solve the problems, you get both. Right? Now, I don't want to live in a society anymore that can't solve problems. We've got one. You see where it has. I mean, you're all here because probably you're not homeless, but the rest of the middle class is homeless. They lost their houses in the last thing. Right? So we better get good at solving problems. I live in the Southwest. You know, everything is burning and there is no water because we couldn't solve some very fundamental problems. So don't invest in educational reform that isn't about problem solving. All you get is a bunch of smart people doing stupid things. Now, it is core to a Big G game that you have made people producers. Right? You don't empower people by just being consumers. Teaching people to read and not write, teaching people to play and not design is the way to make customers and consumers, not producers and thinkers. And we live in the age of fabrication. That is, we are making tools where everyday people can make stuff. Now, you know, of course, well, they can certainly make music, they can make a bunch of digital stuff, but if you follow the work on Fab Labs and fabrication, especially in the work of my colleague in the center, Alan Gershenfeld, his brother Neil Gershenfeld, wonderful book called Fab Lab, you can now make skin out of cells if you want. People are beginning to be able to make stuff, print stuff out of any imaginable thing. And it's pushing it down to a craft level where everyday people, if they want to pay the price in learning, they can actually begin to make stuff. There will be a day you can print, you're very close to being able to print skin. But someday, not too far, be able to print a liver. Right? So in an age where we can do that, we better up the ante in our game stuff, right? Because we better make people fabricators and producers. And we already know how to do that because to be a fabricator or producer, you need to have a modding attitude. And the high end of gaming is to have a modding attitude towards everything. I won't take it as I will mod it. I will learn its tools of design and I will mod it. So another way to put this is the Big G game ought to make everybody have a modding attitude. Okay, well, modding attitude with a vengeance here, because, but you see, one of the things you see from World of Warcraft and from Spore and other things, we're just at the tip of this, if you get a strong enough modding attitude, design attitude, then pretty soon the consumer, this is what's happening in the fabrication stuff, they begin to make so much of your stuff they don't need you anymore. So you think about Will Wright's complete genius in Spore. Games are expensive to make. So why don't I just have the player make? I don't need to pay him anything because humans are suckers for creativity. You make them creative, they don't ask for money. And his attitude is, sure, the designers I have can make stuff better than 90% of the people out there. The trouble is 10% of the people that can make better stuff than my designers. Now today, I don't think there's anything in the game left that he made. Right? And he isn't even there anymore, you see? So your desire for a Big G game is enhance the modding attitude so much that the day comes where there's nothing left that you made, and they don't need you anymore. Right? They give you a gold watch and send you off to make another Big G game. The price of success is they kick you out. Right? And then furthermore, when you leave, they say, well, you look like a good designer at the beginning, but the stuff we got now is so much better. Right? Now, this is a good example. This is a theory crafting thing from World of Warcraft, right? People are debating probability and statistics with a vengeance in order to mod the game to show Blizzard that they know more about the game than Blizzard does. One of the things I don't have here with me, but I love this. This thing where young people get into these affinity spaces and begin to play with the technical information has gone so far that Blizzard has gotten the most erudite, complicated complaint letters in the history of physics. People send them the whole statistical underpinnings of experiments to say, you nerfed my shaman, you idiot. Big G games should be based, the games should not just be about problem solving, but mastery. They should push you to mastery. And to do mastery, we know this, you need a cycle of expertise. A cycle of expertise is practice your butt off until you can do it in your sleep. Then face a problem that doesn't work anymore. Rethink what you just routinized. Practice that till you can do it in your sleep. Then get another challenge. That's been called for 20 years, the cycle of expertise. And it's what we know. Every person who needs mastery goes through that cycle. But real masters, real experts, look for the challenge that will undo their mastery. They look for it. And petty experts avoid it. Now, that's just called level design in games. Although, in a big G game, you should be able to build this level design, this cycle, into the affinity space as well. Games, the little G game in a big G game, to me, one of the best things it does is preparation for future learning. Right? It should kindle interest. It should give you some basic embodied foundations, and it should prepare you for future learning. And the test of that is that you're a better learner outside the game, in the affinity space, or with smart tools and other stuff. We do know how to assess preparation for future learning. This is Dan Schwartz's work, and we do know how to build it, and that's what it should be in there. And then finally, a big G game should always have augmented reality. What I mean by augmented reality, though, is not that you have to lay stuff on the stage that's virtual, although that's fine. Augmented reality means good games make you see the world in a new way. Who has not? I remember when I first played games. I don't know if you some of you may have been doing this too long, but when I first played, you began to dream you're in a game, right? You're trying to click on your dreams. And it's just frustrating because nothing happens when you click on the dream. And also, you click on the world, right? You play a game, and all of a sudden you say, oh, she's up. What if I click on that light over there, right? The game begins to overlay on the world. Well, Portal had as one piece of its advertising that the game will give you a new tool, and by giving you this new tool, you will surmise new possibilities in the world. Right? Think about it. That gives you a tool that makes you pay attention to the affordances, the physical affordances of your environment, well beyond what your body can do. And all of a sudden, you see the environment. I would never see this environment as something that I can fly across until I hit Portal. When I played SWAT 4, for months I kept planning how to enter buildings unseen. And you have to do it, right? And for a person who's socially shy, this is a very good skill. So the fact is, good games do change your brains to look at the world in a new way. And it should therefore be, any big G game should make you see new possibilities for solutions in the world. Even the commercial good games do. Forward my example, right? But lots of them. There's the thing. One thing I love about this quote, as a person who spent the second half of my career in education, that's the best educational vision I've ever seen. And it's on a box for advertising. I don't know, in a society whose school system and educational system and college system has less good visions of learning than the commercials on the boxes of its games, does sound like it's in trouble. Don't you think that's a great, wouldn't it be nice to surmise some new possibilities so that New York is not needing a snorkel when global warming comes, and in the Southwest I won't burn up? See, it would be nice. Not going to happen, but... All right, now, games, big G games should involve adaptive mentoring. That is, we do know from all the research and learning that mentoring is crucial. It is not true people learn just because you put them in nice creative spaces and turn them loose. Now, affinity spaces are built in ways that they're not age-graded and newbies and experts together, so they have copious mentoring. And also flexible. Sometimes you mentor if you're the expert, sometimes you get mentored. So mentoring and guided design, crucial. Learning ecology, there should be, within the big G game, which means the software and the affinity space and all this, there should be multiple ways of learning, right? Now, I am not, even though we just heard about School of One, I am not a fan of saying, let's customize learning to you individually so much that you never get challenged. Or you're a learner who only learns through music. So, you know what? The world will not adapt to you. I thought it would. It has not once yet adapted to me. And you will be forced to learn in ways that are not your forte. So, rather than adapting, it should teach you to learn in different ways and force you to adopt some new styles, to find out what your possibilities are and not just what your self is. You know, I guarantee you that humans are fragile enough that what you are today sucks. You have potential to be more, you should demand to be more, not to be catered to the point where you don't find out what you're good at, what your passion can be, and what's possible. So adaptive, sure, it should be saying, where are you? But it should say, you know, we're going to not only have the game adapt to you, you're also going to have to sometimes adapt to the game. We're going to help you do that and adapt to other people. It is very important that Big G games have good remedial education. What I mean by this is so many people in America are damaged learners. They thought, I can't learn math. I'm no good at math. That's not true. You were taught math horribly. You were told to be scared of math. Right? So what you have to say is, how do I let everybody in? How do I find out where you're hurt and undo the hurt? Now, I have an article on, I was a special learner with real-time strategy games. I had been traumatized so often by losing so quickly in real-time strategy games to a 6-year-old that I was a damaged learner. And then I picked up Rise of Nations, which has this incredible tutorial. If you're playing the tutorial and you don't like it, a sign comes and says, well, maybe there's another way for you to learn. We have other ways for you to do this. Would you like to try another way? And it does the whole thing. And it undid my damage. And all of a sudden I said, it wasn't me that was damaged. It was those idiots who made those games that were damaged, right? And so, and by the way, there's research in education that shows that if you're one of these students that got a bunch of A's, and you go to college and you get your first C, if you say, well, I got the A's in high school and I thought I was smart, but I guess I'm not smart, I got the C, those kids give up. The ones who are successful said, I am smart, this teacher's an idiot. And they do fine. And finally, this is a very 20th century thing. Nobody's going to be successful by being a generalist in the 21st century. You have to be genuinely good at something. And that means 10,000 hours of practice. That means we should display to people, young people and adults, possible interests. But the function of a Big G game should show you an interest, and then for some people kindle it into a passion that will fuel 10,000 hours of practice, persistence past failure, and total identity commitment. And the goal of education should be for every young person to find at least one passion, having seen 1,000 interests. And these Big G games should be very good at that. This is David Schaefer's game on urban planning. It allows you to actually replan your own city and then give a report to the mayor. It demands you do it at a professional level, even though you're in middle school. And it held you to very, very high standards, the professional standards, especially since you're going to give this to the mayor. And this captures, a lot of what we've been talking about, right? The different forms of intelligence, the creativity, the innovation that you get to. So now, I told you a lot of principles here, and there'll be a moral about this. I'm actually trying to bore you enough so the moral will be meaningful. All good art, and video games are art, has as one of its major purposes making what we take for granted strange again, to let you see it new. Right? If your Big G game does not make people say, wow, I never saw how weird this Carnegie unit system is. How weird it is that everything is learnable in 13 weeks in a classroom with one teacher and 15 kids paying $50,000. Taking anything in the world has the potential to be frozen stupidity. Not everything is, but lots of stuff is frozen stupidity. The game should unfreeze the stupidity and let people say, wow, that is strange, we got to do that differently. That's art, it's also salvation. That means challenging cultural models. That is challenging the taken for granted. Games, of course, the Big G game no more than the little G game, should be about play and flow. Why about play? What's important about play? What's important about play is that anytime you see any creative professional and they love what they're doing it for a passion, and you ask them, is this your work? They'll always say no. I would do it even if you didn't pay me. They are doing it because it is life-enhancing, it's passionate, and they're bringing to it a sense of play. And the thing, so, I'll tell you, you have to pay me very well to go to a committee meeting. Right? There is no reason in the world, I mean, you sue people for the neurons you lose in a committee meeting. But you don't need to pay me to write. The only thing that I find as pleasant as playing video games is writing, because writing to me is a game. It's design, it's confrontation with your weaker self. So, people cannot truly be productive unless they have a space of play and flow. That's why it's sad that our biggest employer is Walmart. The final principle is actually the most important one now. It's the political aspect of games. You know that we now have the most unequal society in the world, in a developed world. By the way, we're just one hair away from having as much inequality as South Africa. So on many variables like child health, life expectancy, healthcare, it's not just that we rank last in the industrial world. There are developing countries, so-called poor countries, that beat us. Right? Our life expectancy is below Cuba's. Right? And we boycotted them for 30 years. So, and there is a body of work that is really crucial. It's called the health syndrome. It's been known for years. That if you line up in any society in the world, any society, people by status, and it doesn't matter how you define status, it could be number of bedrooms in your house, education, money, whatever, and you line them up from the highest status person to the lowest status person over here, that status distribution correlates very highly with their health. For everybody in that line, the chances are the person on that side is healthier than the person right next to them. Right? This is a statistical thing, there could be exceptions. But so there's this weird thing that in societies, inequality and hierarchy correlates with health. Right? Now, all societies show this, but the amount of inequality they have is quite different. Japan has much less inequality than America. CEOs in Japan make 14 to 1 to their employees and what they make. American CEOs make 220 to 1. And therefore, Japan is an infinitely more healthy society for everybody. Right? So this is the thing, health correlates with status, but the more equality there is in a society, the healthier everybody is, not just the poor. The rich guy in America has less good health than the rich guy in Japan. Right? It's to everybody's benefit to lower inequality. But so people say, well then, what causes this correlation between inequality and health, between status and health? And the best answer, the one that I'm convinced by, is that people feel healthy and have agency when they feel that they count in their society. That what they do matters. That they are a participant that can change things. And when people feel they do not count, that what they do doesn't matter, it makes them very unhealthy. Right? There's something about human beings where they need to count. And in America today, our biggest problem is that very few people feel they count. That's bad for our health care, but it should be our goal to use Big G games to show you you're wrong. You do count. You are worth something. You have agency. What you do matters. And that is changing your identity. My favorite identity that I've had in games, the one that changed me the most, was playing Chibi Robo, because I never thought I could be a good, decent 4-inch house-cleaning robot, what he is, who can only stay out for a few seconds till he has to plug in. And in addition, is tasked with not only cleaning the house, and you get happiness points how well you clean it, but he has to solve all the marital and social problems in the house. And he finds out at night that some of the toys are alive, and he has to find out why they're alive. And when he does, in the first one, he finds out from a big robot that doesn't work in the basement why the toys are alive. It's one of those moments where it makes you cry, right? People say games can be art and make you cry. Well, that's not true. I mean, they can be art without people weeping. But this is one where you can weep like a baby. Now, the thing is, think of the wonder. that an old, balding fat guy can spend hours as a 4-inch house cleaning robot solving narrow problems. Right? And have in the game, because it's so designed, your problem solving, you know how these games, you solve this problem, you go, I'm so smart. You're probably not, but you really, once you feel I'm smart, you're doing some remediation. Right? Now, if you can make people happy, joyous, and flow from being a 4-inch house cleaning robot, there is no identity you can't do this for. That's the art of game design. There's no science for it. Now, let me close with this. There's 36 principles about learning in my first game. I've just given you, I didn't count them, 20 or more principles about what makes a Big G game. My claim is then, Big G games, that is games that have most or all of the 36 principles in these, are good for learning. Don't write me when you find out a game that has none of these features are good for learning. Right? I didn't make that claim. But also, think about it. That's now like 56 variables. All of them interacting. This is a complex system. It is not open to testing by controlled studies. 56 of these variables interacting to hundreds of people at all different levels is not open to controlled studies. That, I know the government thinks that's the gold standard, but the government thinks a lot of things. Right? The point is that you are clearly, if you're making a Big G game, you're meeting these credentials, and I know, I've hit this at the bar high, you are making a complex system that interacts with human nature, human behavior, human levels, 56 variables interacting. It's as complex a system as global warming, cellular structure, or stars. Those are not open to controlled studies. You have to do design studies, iterated studies, intelligent A/B testing, and you also have to have as your test for success, not that Johnny or Janie passed the test on Tuesday, but that a community of people were far smarter together than they were alone, and they made impact in the world. Okay, thank you. I did this with 12 minutes left. I had no idea how long it would take, because this is a new talk, so I had 12 minutes. No, I did go fast. But it was just to try to overwhelm you so you'd be impressed. All right. Yeah, so we have time for questions, comments, rants, raves. There's a person right there. I can't see you, but that's all right. I don't wear my glasses. It makes me look at me.
Thanks, as always, great ideas. With that many variables, have you prioritized or ranked or found the magical combination of a couple of them to start with?
No. There is none. That would be like asking which of the proteins can we leave out of the cell. You see, even the proteins that aren't the big ones can screw you up if you leave them out because they interact together. By the way, so my suspicion is, remember, this is an interacting system. It's going to require us to do the type of research done in physics, not the type of research done in something else. So the fact is, though, when you look at complex systems, there's no way to predict that taking this variable out will do, because it might seem the most trivial variable, but it actually interacts in a way that screws the whole system. So, yeah, I want them all. I want them all. And there's probably others, by the way. See, I'm too bad it's hard. You already knew that designing a great game like Half-Life or System Shock was extremely hard work that required not just science but art, right? So you did that. You made great games. So let's make great Big G games now. It's going to be harder. So what? That's not, we don't make, making Trivial Pursuit to compete with a pencil in school. That can't be your goal in life. So I don't think so. Maybe we'll find it out, but I doubt it. Yes? Oh.
Hi, I know you can't see me, so this is Jody Asbell Clark from Magic.
Oh.
So as we go towards participative cultures of learning, hopefully, is there anything in the hierarchical, scholarly academia we know now of expertise that you would save? And if so, how does it integrate into this?
Well, it's like Aristotle's still with us, right? If Aristotle visited a university and saw the names on the doors, physics, biology, he would say, oh, I recognize all those names. And the universities are set up to make knowledge under disciplinary labels that have not defined how academics work for 50 years. Right? You can test this out. Don't do it. If you're not in college, don't bother with it. But, go to the biology department. Go to the anthropology department. Here's what you're going to find. All the people in there hate each other's guts. The archaeologists don't think the cultural anthropologists are good scientists. The biochemists think the ecologists are right next to Coots. The only thing the biology department is there for and the anthropology department is so they can pick up their checks. They don't work. The biochemist guy, he likes the chemists. Right? The ecology guy, he likes the people doing adaptive studies and computers and simulations and stuff. So the people in universities, knowledge today is produced not just collectively, but around themes that require something like a hunting party in World of Warcraft. Everybody has to bring deep expertise. It has to be pooled. And sometimes somebody better have the big picture. Right? That's how knowledge is produced for 50 years. There's rarely a university in the country that does that. That's why there's such, well, that's not why, because there's 50 other reasons. They're so dysfunctional, right? So don't teach kids under labels that Aristotle made up. See, what does it matter? You have in one of the books a woman who took geometry and failed. So she said, I'm terrible at geometry. She then became a lead designer in Second Life and mastered geometry because she found out, if you're not really good at geometry, your buildings don't stand. See, so we're in a world in which just because I tell you a name, Joe took geometry, she took Second Life, you don't know what they learned. In a real big G game, you're not learning a discipline, you're learning multiple skills, social and emotional intelligence, collective intelligence, you're learning a whole bunch of stuff. So go into the communities and say, what are people learning in the way of problem solving? What specialties are available? Can they pull them? And are they mastering expertise by pushing themselves to new challenges? It's too, by the way, why bother to teach somebody algebra to get separately from other stuff? There's so much to learn. If you're learning design skills, architecture, 3D programming, and geometry together, isn't that better? You got 4 things. See, but that's low status. Doing that, it doesn't sound like you do a course on it. You can't be a professor of Second Life, but you can be a professor of geometry. So it's a complicated world. We ought to be learning 10 things at once, not one. Yes, you. You'll have to
Hurry, the video.
Thank you. As a teacher here, one of the few teachers here, I'm feeling a real disconnect between what's going on in the discussion of game design and what's actually going on in the classroom. And I'm seeing a lot of the trend going towards consumption games, or what I call workbook, where game designers with really good intentions are just going to give us the same old thing in a new shiny package.
Right.
And what I'm seeing in my class, the affinity is what's working, the sandbox, the
guided mentoring in a sandbox.
Minecraft has changed everything
Sure.
shared because
Absolutely.
it's a sandbox. How can we get you guys to understand we don't want you to make it for us? We want to give you, we want spaces
So,
where our kids
you
can
have
build.
just, I wasn't going to say this because I have friends in the audience, but that's why I gave this talk. I'm sick of seeing chocolate and broccoli games, little modular games. I can't tell you that making them won't make you rich, but I can tell you that it won't make you happy and it won't get you into heaven. So the fact that we're giving the schools what they already do, and that is like making prisons better. We actually need to take the bars off, right? Now, people disagree. I understand that but just because the market will buy your stuff, remember, your health is not just contingent on your money, it's contingent on feeling in bed when you went tonight that what you did mattered. But again, yeah, it is contentious.
Hi, I'm a developer. So this might be just semantics, but
Where are we?
so part of Big G Games is that, are you looking also just for the meta game as well, a game that, the game creating the game outside of the game, basically? And I'm going to riff a little bit on the teacher's question prior. A game that also then requires almost a game outside of it to, you know, with problem solving in the classroom to then fix problems inside
Yes.
the program?
I don't think that the little G game has to be software. What I demand of a game is that it has well-defined problems that you are highly motivated to solve, and that when you solve them, you get conceptual understanding and meta-understanding, that it creates preparation for future learning and sets the foundations for situated understanding. If you want to do that with any other form of game, that's fine. If you want to call it not a game, it's fine, but you have to do that. Embodied understanding, preparation for future learning, kindling of interest, you know, that stuff that's what's in the little G game, and the little G game is, and that's why the little G game keeps pushing people into the affinity space and the other social things, and then they come back and change the game, right? They do the mods, but yeah, that doesn't have to be digital media. It could be theater. It could be anything. Mark Prinsky, I can see him.
Well, thank you. You answered a lot of my question, which was you described a great all the things 50 plus. There's probably more that you want to see in a great learning system. And then you started by saying this is just one way forward of many. So I was looking to see what your thoughts were on other ways forward. And you just mentioned theater, but what are some others?
So the thing is, what I mean by it is other ways forward in that you can build these principles into other things, right? The two things that don't count is traditional instruction, which you tell everybody everything and take away their agency, or liberal instruction, which you just turn them loose. This is well-designed, well-guided, collective intelligence. So at the very minimum, you must be designing for collective intelligence, where intelligence doesn't mean just cognitive intelligence. We're a gaming community, and games are very good as part of this, but there's other stuff. People have done it with theater. And you can do it with labs, you can do it with models, you can do it in the world. High Tech High does it wonderfully around projects. But there has to be a place where you don't have just verbal meanings of your words. You see those words as they go into the world, because your body has been involved in problem solving, whether it's in a digital media project, lab, or something else, and where there is mentoring and guidance. It's not just do what you please. So the role of a teacher in this is very different. The role of the teacher is a designer and resourcer of other people's learning, and if they create a big G game with its affinity space so well, that might go on 20 years beyond them. See, imagine you created one of these on the Italian Renaissance, which you could do so brilliantly by taking something like the world of Assassin's Creed, and you began to teach in there about the Renaissance by having people live it, do it, all the stuff. The day will come where people say, I love the Renaissance. I think I'll spend the rest of my life here. Now, that person, they graduate, they're with your college for the next 20 years. They're gotten so expert, they're mentoring and teaching, they're modding and designing. Hey, you don't need the teacher anymore. And the college has an alumnus who's that's there for 20 years. It's just win-win, right? The thing about it is your life goal should be to create these that sustain themselves, and the day comes where you get your gold watch, right? Where they don't need you. By the way, if kids are smart enough, you can have 7-year-olds throw you out. This doesn't have to be in college, yes?
Hi, I'm also one of the few teachers here, and culturally there are a lot of things that need to change in order for what you're talking
Absolutely.
to really take hold. What do we as classroom?
What do you see the role of the classroom teacher is in evangelizing, and how do we get this sort of message out?
Well, right now, as a teacher in an urban school, you are like a person with a dike with a billion holes, and you have your finger in one. So thank you, you're holding back the dike. But it's going to collapse. And so one of the things you have to do, look, we are here as Games for Social Change. I talk about games, but as an educator, I am completely and totally convinced that there's no point about talking about school reform until we've talked about society reform. And the reason for that is public schools are actually extremely good at doing what they're supposed to do, and that is produce 3/5 of Americans as service workers. The largest employer in the United States is Walmart. The 6 Walmart family, 6 members of the family that inherited the Walmart money have more money than the bottom 30% of Americans combined, and yet won't pay health insurance in their stores. right? So what's happening is the urban school system is there to produce people with so-called new basics. Basic literacy, numeracy, and knowing how to be not sullen to customers. And because 3/5 of the workers are going to be service workers, and they're not going to feel like they count, which is going to be dangerous for society. Then, if you want to be in the 2/5 that won't be that, you can buy a better education. Right? That's the system. If that's what you believe in, it works wonderfully. It doesn't need to be reformed. So, what you as a teacher have to do is go out and say, education is not about producing people for the jobs that exist. Education is about producing a human being who civically participates and counts in the world. The rhetoric of education, whether kindergarten or college for jobs, is a dead end because 3/5 of the jobs suck. Right? Do you really want to be producing service workers? So you have to say, what are we trying to produce in an education? We're trying to produce a human being who can save the world and count no matter where they're working. Many people who work at Walmart go home and get involved in either gaming or something else and feel a sense of dignity and that they count. We need to spread that. So you as a teacher should be engaged in reforming the society, not just your school.
Hi. Sorry. Hi.
there
My
you
name
are.
is Stephen Michael. I'm another teacher, and
So the audience is just full of
I'm sensing a pattern. I was wondering. I think all of this, what you put up there about all of these different traits is great. I'm wondering, so many of these ideas seem like they can be applied to so many different things beyond just traditional video games. I'm wondering specifically about the affinity groups and the culture of discussion that you're trying to foster. Do you have any thoughts about how to create that in an environment where maybe you don't have access to lots of technology, or you can't create something?
You don't need technology. So, there is this wonderful technology out in the world. If you open the door, there's a thing like a pond, right? The pond, you can get tacit understandings. The mosquitoes bite, the snake bites. I mean, there's the world. One of the things digital media is here is a lot of kids can't get to the world. If your kid could run a farm, why have Harvest Moon? Somebody said to me once, well, I think kids should have cows, not just be in Harvest Moon. I said, of course, I love cows. I wish everybody had a cow. But not everybody can have a cow, so they have Harvest Moon. Right? So, yeah, you don't need technology. Education's not about technology. It's about interacting people to be smarter together than alone. You can do that in various ways. Now, that's not to excuse saying that poor kids shouldn't get any technology, right? But they should. But, we're talking, like, take a thing, this does involve, you ever heard of Galaxy Zoo? So this is the thing where everyday people, we're just supposed to help scientists by going through billions of pictures of galaxies and sorting them into the two types. Well, the typical of this stuff, they formed an infinity space, they discovered whole new classes of galaxies. They're now experts on this stuff. And the only technology was a bunch of scientists giving pictures. And then, they need the internet to deal with each other. But if you've got kids, they could actually talk face to face. That's the technology. And so, and see what, by the way, the downside of this is, whenever you see people in an affinity space taking it to the top, it's usually only about 20% of the people in space. Right? It's the Pareto principle. 20% do 80%, 80%. But that means educators' goals should be to say, hey, you should be in a lot of big G games where you're in the 80%, because you're learning, you're getting an interest, but you find one where you're in the 20%. That should be the educational standard I have. Every kid has experienced multiple 80% roles in big G games, and they found the one there in the 20%. That should be the standards. Those standards are enough for the whole country. Saves a lot of money. We can fire the assessment people. I have no time left at all. Thank you. You've been a great audience.
Ladies and gentlemen,